Man, I read about, he just told Joshua and Israel to go in there and slaughter all the Canaanites, the slaughtering of the innocents, Frank. How could that be true?
He also said that he ought to slaughter all the Israelites that worship the golden calf. So was it genocide or was it sinocide? There's judgment in the Old Testament, quite obviously. And people will say, you know, well, how come the God of the Old Testament is so different from the God of the New? First of all, they're not. But secondly, and for context, we need to realize that the Old Testament is covering thousands of years. The New Testament's covering maybe 60. There's a lot more time to mess up in thousands of years. So there's going to be just wars in the Old Testament because God is getting the promised people in the promised land to bring forth the promised Messiah, and he has to do it through free creatures. So he's pushing out people who are going to pollute the Israelites. The whole Old Testament is pretty much quit worshiping false gods, stay true to me. And the reason they got pulled away from God so much is because of these other people in the land who were sacrificing their children to Molech and doing all sorts of evil things. You know, it's interesting, Josh, because this just happened. I was down at Mississippi State just last week, and a guy got up to the microphone and he said, basically, why does God kill people in the Old Testament? I said, where are you on the abortion issue? He said, I'm pro-choice. I said, can I ask you a question? Why is it that when God decides who lives and dies in the Old Testament, that's immoral for him, but when you decide who lives and dies with regard to abortion, that's your moral right?
Wow.
He finally just said, I'm done. And he left the microphone. See, the problem is we think we have the right to murder people. God doesn't have the right to move people from one life to the next. Look, if Christianity is true, people don't die, they just change location. They go from this life to the next life, and that's up to God when that happens. Judgment happens a lot in the Old Testament because there's a long period of time that God's dealing with. But there's a lot of judgment in the New. Jesus is the one that really amplifies the talk of hell and the whole book of Revelation. If you think genocide, so-called genocide in the Old Testament was bad, take a look at the book of Revelation.